Across America and around the world, you're listening to the Hour of the Time. I'm your host, William Cooper. Tonight's guest is A. Ralph Epperson, author of The Unseen Hand, The New World Order, and producer of several videotapes on the conspiratorial view of history. Don't go away, folks. You don't want to miss one single word of tonight's episode of the Hour of the Time. I'm very pleased, ladies and gentlemen, to welcome tonight to the Hour of the Time a dear friend, a close acquaintance, a fellow warrior on the battlefield between the forces of light and darkness. And, of course, if you know the truth about it, one thinks one is light when it's really dark, and the other one thinks one is dark when it's really light, and everything is topsy-turvy in this battle. It's difficult to tell who the enemy is. Welcome, Mr. Ralph Epperson.
What are you saying? Which side do you think I'm on, Bill Cooper?
Well, I'm not sure which side any of us are on from one given moment to the next, and it's difficult. I'm sure you'll agree.
I'm on the side of light, the side of the true light, of the Lord Jesus Christ.
But doesn't the other side think that they're the light?
I can't disagree. That's what we just said. That's correct. That's, as you point out, that's correct.
Ralph, give us some background. Who are you? Where did you come from? How did you get into this? What are you doing on this show? How did you get from point A, which is complete utter disbelief that anything like this could ever be real, to now marching out here on the battlefield with many others who have found that it's not only real, but it's imminent?
Well, Bill, I don't have a real illustrious story to tell you, but I'll tell you what did happen. I'm a college graduate. I went to the University of Arizona, and after completion of my bachelor's degree, I went to California, and I thought that I had been educated properly, so I felt quite confident in my future. But I didn't know how to vote in the California elections coming from Arizona. So I decided to join the thing called the Young Republicans. I was young, and I was, quote, a Republican. I walked in the door and told them that I was there to learn how to vote properly. And a young man by the name of Jim, and I've written about him in both of my books, came to me and said, Ralph, you not only have to learn that, but you've got to read what he called revisionist history. And I didn't know what that meant.
And you were a historian, is that correct?
Well, not that time I wasn't. No, I was just a college graduate. So I said, Jim, you're talking to the wrong man. I hate to read. He said, Ralph, you've got to read revisionist history. I don't know what that is. He said, that's my point. So that's what started me. In 1963, I started reading, and I've read, like you have, volumes and volumes to the point where I've got libraries that I can't even count anymore. But I started reading, and as I read, I discovered the footprints of a conspiracy. I had never heard that there was anything, even laughingly, in college. My professors never even said, once that I can remember, there's a group of people who believe that this version of history we're going to teach you is not true. They call themselves revisionists. That wasn't even laughingly admitted in my college career, so this was all brand new to me. But the interesting about it is, as I read, I found their footprints. For some reason, they've made it available to us, and I just kept reading. I learned in college how to underline my books, and I did that, and then I stored them in my library. And the next step was someone said, come and lecture to a class or a Kiwanis Club or a Rotary, wherever it was. So I did that next. And then someone recommended I speak to their class in a community college. I did that. And then the next thing was I was teaching part-time in the Northwest and around Portland, Oregon. And that's what got me started, because that's then you had to put in writing what you believed in. So that's what I did. But I decided that since I couldn't explain these things, I would use the writings of those who could. So whenever I lectured then, as I do today, I use their writings. I don't use my own. And I take them and their material and their information and put it in a lecture form. And then those notes later became The Unseen Hand, my first book that came out in 1985. So that's about it. There was no knowledge about this at all. I wasn't on the search for it. I stumbled into it, and I'm grateful that I did because I know that I'm right.
So your friend actually got you to looking in this direction.
That's correct.
And you really didn't know what you were looking for.
That's exactly correct. Because in 1963, there was very little information on this subject. The first book that I read was the bestseller called None Dare Call It Treason, as I remember, by John Stormer. That was the first one. And when I read that book, I realized the man was right. It was just, you don't have to hit me with the shovel to make me understand, to see the truth. I read that book and knew he was right. And that's what started it. I read that book first.
Now, if you're like me and many other people, at first, I tend, if anybody came to me and talked about anything like what listeners hear on this show, I would have said, hey, you're nuts, get away from me, I don't want to talk to you anymore, until I came across something that I absolutely couldn't deny. I mean, it hit me in the face. And this happened to me while I was a member of the Office of Naval Intelligence, and I knew that this information was true, and I also knew that the rest of the world didn't know anything about it. What was it that hit you in the face like that?
Well, it was just the rendition of what he was explaining. It made sense. It fit. I didn't like to admit it. I had to come to grips with it. That's the first thing we had to discover. But I realized that this man, John Stormer, and his version of the history was correct. I just knew it. And then I read The Politician by Robert Welch. That got me mad. When I read that book, I remember even today gritting my teeth in anger when I realized what Dwight Eisenhower had done to the American people and the American fighting men during World War II. And that's probably the book that got me started, because when I realized that Robert Welch was right in his statements about Dwight Eisenhower and that we did not believe those statements to be true, I knew that was on the right track.
Now, for me, that was the hardest thing to do, was to confront the reality of what it was that I was learning and be able to look myself in the mirror and admit that I had really been ignorant and basically very stupid most of my life, and that it was time to change that.
Yes.
Was that difficult for you too, Ralph?
Bill, there's no question. That is the major obstacle all of us have to face, because you have to admit that you've been lied to and duped and that you've accepted it. You didn't question. And that's where we all are. We've all got to come to that point, and that's where a lot of us lose, because we do not come to that point, and when we do, we won't accept it. We won't admit that we've been lied to and that we've accepted the lie.
And folks, I know that many of you out there have met this head on and dealt with it. I also know that there are many of you out there sitting in your living rooms listening to us who have not and may never. And you sort of look on this show when you listen to it as in your mind really knowing that what we're telling you is true, but not willing to admit it to yourself or your neighbors, and so treating it more or less as entertainment. One of these days, something is going to happen to you, like happened to Ralph and I, and you're going to have to make a decision. You're at the Y in the road, and you're going to have to take the left fork or the right fork. And believe me, everybody is going to have to make that choice. And you better get used to that right now. The more you listen to the show, the easier that choice is going to be, I believe. I could be wrong, but I believe that that's the way it's going to happen.
Well, that's where we all are, Bill. It's awful hard to believe that the people that we know as our elected leaders are leading us into trouble. That's hard to believe. The average American doesn't want to believe that. See, the bad guy was always over there in Europe someplace. But when you start thinking the bad guy's in our government and that you voted for him, that's a tough decision to deal with. A tough problem. So we've got to face that. I faced it. I came to the grips with it, and I now understand exactly what American history is and where we're going.
And where do you think that is, Ralph?
Well, I decided that after I wrote my book, The Unseen Hand, in 1985, I did not know the motive of this conspiracy that I had proven to be true in my 20-some years of research for my first book. So I decided to find the evidence of that conspiracy. Not only the evidence, but the motive. Where were we going? What was the plan? What's our future? And I found it, and I wrote my book called The New World Order in 1990. That's our future. That's where we're going. That's what these people want.
They want a new world order, and this a lot of people think that George Bush coined that phrase. Those of us who study this knows that phrase goes all the way back. Napoleon talked about it. Hitler talked about it. A lot of people throughout history have talked about it. And there has been throughout history generally a sort of loose-knit plan that they follow, and the plan changes with the times and the obstacles they run into. But they've had this goal for literally centuries, maybe thousands of years.
That's correct. That's what I tried to prove in my book, The New World Order. This thing that goes back 6,000 years. I found that in their own literature. The one thing that I tried to do, and I'm sure you do the same thing, Bill, is that we can find their footprints in their own material. For some reason, they've made it available to us. It takes a little while to dig it and find it, but it is there. They put their footprints in the sand, as I call it. All we've got to do is find that out and then go on the trail. It's there. Once you find it, you know where we've been and you know where we're going.
That's correct. When you first began to study this, what was what was your idea then of what was happening?
Oh, it was very, very limited, very meager. Obviously, I felt that there were just people like Dwight Eisenhower maybe had a little different version of what we should do, and that he was the one that did these things. And then you start connecting him to others who had similar views. Then you start to see a trend developing between presidents. Then you start to see a trend developing behind the presidents, meaning the people who put the presidents in office. And once you start connecting that power with the elected official that we see up front, then you start developing the theory of conspiracy. Because a conspiracy, as you know, Bill, and your listeners probably know, by definition, is two or more people working in secret for an evil purpose. And so once you find the footprints leading you to the people behind the power, then you're on the right track. Then you know where you're going.
That's correct. Now, I reached a point in my research and in my studies where I had to step back and say, wait a minute, this is ridiculous because I know all these people are involved, but I can't find any instance where they all meet together where they could sit down and plan this. So there has to be something underlying that I didn't understand that connects all these people together and allows them to conspire together without actually going someplace and having a great big convention.
Well, you see, this is the problem with trying to find out how to develop the information on a conspiracy. By definition, they operate in secret. And it's a commonly asked question, I know you get the question as much as I do, is how do you know it's real if it's a conspiracy? That's the problem. But for some reason, and it's something that I know you know, I know any of your listeners know who've been researching this, they put their footprints in the sand. Now, many times you don't know who they are, but you can find the evidence that they've walked there. You can find the footprint. And once you find it, and you notice where it's going and where it's been, then you know you're on the trail of the conspiracy. But I'm asked that question constantly. Who are they? And it's a difficult question to answer because they don't want you to know, but they do want you to know that they've led you into the particular event and that they're leading us someplace else. That's what the truth of the information is, that there is a path. Once you find it, you're on the right track.
Not only a path, but when you begin to connect this together, and if and I'm sure you did, if you sit down and do what I did, and that is try to figure out, well, wait a minute, if they're conspiring, how come none of them talk? I mean, why isn't that nobody's talking? There's got to be something very powerful that keeps them silent, and it can't be money, because if it was money, I can go give this guy a little more money, and he'll tell me everything he knows, but he won't. And what I found is that the best cohesive bonds to hold this all together, and what I found was exactly what it was, is a hidden religion that nobody knows anything about.
That's exactly correct. That's what this is. You've got to understand that this is not money. That's not the motive. Power is not the motive. Greed is not the motive. It's bigger than that. In fact, it's all of that plus more. And you're correct when you say that it is a religion. This is what motivates these people. It's a different view of religion than the traditional Judeo-Christian teachings. This is something that is beyond that. It's bigger than that. It's broader than that. But it is what motivates these people, and it's also what keeps them silent. They take an oath, as far as I can tell in my research, that they will not reveal the truth of their activities nor the extent of their involvement. And that's what we've discovered. You find that everywhere you look.
And there are real punishments for those who break that oath.
Oh, yes. And, of course, we've heard examples of that. There's just one recently up in Italy where was someone inside the Masonic Lodge, the P2 group, apparently broke with it and was found on some bridge in London hanging. That was all symbolic, a ritualistic murder. That was the price he paid for apparently breaking with their information. That's happened in the past with other leaders in America as well. This is not something that's just European or foreign. It's many of the deaths in America, at least several of the ones that we all know about, have been caused by members of these secret societies.
Well, now that we've laid some groundwork, Ralph, what was it that you began to find out?
Well, I think it's very easy. That's an interesting question, and of course you can't answer that in 2 or 3 sentences, but basically I found out that there was, in America first, let's start with that, all I found was the evidence of their involvement, this conspiracy's involvement, for 200 years in American history. And one of the reasons I know that I'm right is because many of the leaders of the past, people that we know about, Abraham Lincoln and Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Roosevelt, people like this have all written about this conspiracy during their day. They tried to warn us. Andrew Jackson, another one of these. The tragic part about it, at least from what I know, is that these men didn't put their writings into a book form that we can save for posterity. You can't find a book written by Abraham Lincoln talking about the money power that we know he talks about. So for whatever reason, and it's quite likely these men thought maybe the American people wouldn't believe them, they didn't put their overall thoughts in writing in a book form. It's also quite possible, Bill, as you know, that they might have done that, and those books have been destroyed by those involved in the conspiracy. And if that's the case, then we're really those were decisions made against our best interest because we can't find that material.
We know that instances like that have happened where someone has sat down and either from their research or from first-hand knowledge from being a member of this group has sat down and written a book, and as soon as it was published, all of the copies were bought up or stolen, and except for a few copies that remained hidden in obscure libraries, literally disappeared from the public view. And sometimes the authors of those books disappeared along with their life's work. We can find evidence of this conspiracy and warnings from our forefathers sprinkled throughout their letters, their writings, interviews that were done with them, all the way from way before the beginning, the actual written beginning, and by written I mean the Declaration of Independence of this country, all the way up to and including the present day, where just recently in his book, Barry Goldwater gave us a warning also, where he says the executive branch of the government has been infiltrated and is in control of a group which intends to destroy the United States of America. And I can go on and on and on. But when you first began delving into this, I mean, you told us about a couple of books that you read, and you began to look at, and you began to see the footprints of this conspiracy back in history and up to the present day, and you looked around. What came to mind?
Well, I think the first step is fear, almost absolute tyranny of fear, because you realize this thing is immense, and that people that you and I have trusted for our lives, with our lives, have been betraying us. And so the first step is fear. Then the second one is, well, what do I do about this? And that's when you turn the corner. If you decide to do something about it, then you commit yourself to getting involved. And that's generally where people quite often will stop their research. Once they get to that point, once they realize it's real, the next step is, what do I do about it? And that's where a lot of fellow Americans quit. They just stop. This is immense, it's ongoing, and it's something we've all got to be involved with.
A lot of them understand that before they will even admit the truth, that to admit the truth means that they must become involved because it makes them responsible. And the way that they get around it is they draw down a curtain and they deny that anything is wrong, that there could possibly be any control of the events of history. And what they'll tell you is everything just happens by accident.
Well, that's the one that we're taught in schools, and that's the one that they're willing to accept because, like you said, Bill, once you become concerned, you should become convicted. convicted. And if you don't become convicted, the reason is because you don't want to become involved. This is a scary process, and once you've got to admit that you were the one that caused the problem because you refused to admit the truth or the arguments of those who were trying to point out to you there was something going on. It's very difficult. It's a tough decision, and I don't argue that. I'm faced with it as you are every day of our lives. We find people constantly refusing to read the evidence or look at it because they don't want to admit that it could very well be true.
Well, for some of the people out there that are shaking their heads, and I can hear it now because I hear this all the time, they talk for a long time, and they didn't give me any proof. What is some of the proof?
Well, that's the one thing about it that I cannot explain is that they've left their footprints in the sand. All you've got to do is start looking. The back of my book, The Unseen Hand, is over 30 pages of footnotes. And these are not sources that are buried or whatever. These are sources that you can read, the national magazines of the day, of the period as well, books written by people involved or books written by historians. It's there. All you've got to do is find it. And so, for whatever reason, it is there, you find it, and you can find the evidence that this conspiracy exists.
Not only evidence, and there's tons of it. And those of you who are steady listeners to this program know that because I've given you references, books, footnotes. I've told you where to go and what to look for. And many of you have done that. Many of you have not done that. But what really got me going was when I began to find admissions in their own writings of what it was that they were doing and who it was that they worshipped and why they were trying to bring this all about that I thought was absolutely incredible until I found out that they don't believe that we have the intelligence to not only catch on to what they're doing, but to ever be able to stop them. Mm-hmm. So they made these admissions with the confidence that even if we find out about it, we're not going to do anything about it because we're all a bunch of stupid cattle anyway.
That's correct. Yes, you bet. That's another one of the problems is dealing with the evidence. There are people who have been involved who have stepped forward. Probably the best example of this, and I'm sure you've talked about this already on your program, is the book written by Carroll Quigley, Ph.D., trained at Harvard. In fact, he got his Ph.D. from Harvard. He wrote a book called Tragedy and Hope in 1968.
And he was, in fact, Bill Clinton's mentor.
Yes, that's where I was going with that. That's the next problem. See, let's go back to Carroll Quigley, though. Quigley admitted in his book that he'd been made aware of this conspiracy about 20 years before he wrote it. So he figured 1968 or 66 when he wrote it. 20 years minus would put him back to around 1946 at the end of World War II. So Dr. Quigley, with the Harvard Ph.D. and teaching at Harvard, Princeton, and then later at Georgetown, admitted that he'd been aware of this thing for over 20 years. He went on to admit that he'd actually been made privy, is the word he used, to their own papers for something like 2 years. So here's a man who apparently was invited into the circle of this conspiracy to write a book about, to research and write the book. He wrote the book. It came out in 1966, forgive me, and as you pointed out, Bill Clinton went to Georgetown to read the book, and that's where Dr. Quigley had an impact on him. Now you say, how do we know that? We can find that quotation in Bill Clinton's own writings. He wrote a book called Putting People First, I believe it's called, during the campaign of 1992. I have a copy of that book on pages, I think, 217. He quotes his actual acceptance speech at the Democratic Convention. At the last part of the book, I believe it's on page 231 for the purist who wants to know where this is. You can read that he says that what got him into politics. Now, he's giving this speech, we got to understand, at the Democratic Convention, the July something, I think the 16th of 1992, the largest audience of the world that he probably would ever have at one time without interruption, all watching him live give this speech. And in there he tells us that there not only is a conspiracy in the world, but that he supports it. Bill Clinton admitted that you and I, Bill, are right, that there is a conspiracy and that he was part of it. He said this on national television. It's in his book, and it's very easy to find. Now, the next step is, why do we believe that? I mean, why should we believe that? Because Bill Clinton told us. And we can now know that Bill Clinton knows that you and I are right. Let me finish with the last thought. In that speech, he goes on to point out that he got his call, as he calls it, to citizenship from John Kennedy, the President John Kennedy. And we know that during the summer of 1963, Bill Clinton was in Washington, D.C., At Boys Nation, which is the next step after Boys State. Apparently he was elected from the state of Arkansas to go to Boys Nation in Washington, D.C., and John Kennedy came to visit. And there's been a picture released of Bill Clinton shaking the hand of John Kennedy during the summer of 1963. Then he went on to say in his speech that call, meaning the call to citizenship or public office, was clarified by Dr. Carroll Quigley, a professor he had at Georgetown. And that's our link. Now, Bill Clinton now knows, he's admitting that what Quigley taught him was correct, that he supported it, and that Dr. Quigley was a professor that got him into politics.
Well, we know that his link is much tighter than that. He was, in fact, a Rhodes Scholar. And he did, in fact, go on an invitation to Moscow at a time when American citizens were forbidden to go to Moscow. Yeah. And that was for the purpose of seeing how socialism works close hand. And I think he learned his lesson well, as we're beginning to see.
Let's talk briefly about the Rhodes Scholarship Program, because that's where he learned about the Rhodes Program, I believe, was at Georgetown University.
If they've all heard it from me, let's hear it from you.
Okay, well, that's fine. Good. I'm glad you're... See, this is the point. I want to thank you, Bill, for what you're doing. You're getting this information out and making it available. I'll just repeat it briefly for those who haven't heard it or perhaps are listening tonight for the first time. Dr. Quigley talked about Cecil Rhodes. Now, we in America don't know much about this man because he was a European. I think he was from England. Cecil Rhodes went to South Africa during the 1880s to 1900s, early 1900s, to get control of the wealth down there, and he succeeded. In fact, in his book, Dr. Quigley points out that Cecil Rhodes started what we call the Boer War, B-O-E-R, in about 1902, I believe it was. And he goes on to say in this book that the Boer War was intended to get control of the gold mines in South Africa. And apparently the Boer were a people that controlled these, I guess. And apparently he was unsuccessful, so he called the English government. English troops were sent there, and subsequently the Rhodes and his allies got control of the gold mines in the Boer War. And Quigley admits that this is what happened, that this was done for this power group, what Quigley called the Anglophile Network. That was the reason behind Cecil Rhodes going there. And then Cecil Rhodes took the wealth that he made there to create the Rhodes Scholarship. And the purpose of the Rhodes Scholarship was to teach young people the goal of the founder, which is a one-world socialist government, led by this conspiracy. So little Billy Clinton, after he graduated from college in 1968, went to Oxford on a Rhodes Scholarship, and that's where he learned about this conspiracy.
And we can trace all of these Americans who actually went to England to attend Oxford under the Rhodes Scholarship. We can look back in their administrations, in the periods where they held office, in any branch of the government, and we can see that these people, the Rhodes Scholars, have always led us closer to socialism than we would have gone if they had not occupied those positions. It's time to take our break, folks. Don't go away. Don't get out of your seat. We'll be right back after this very brief pause. Well, for those of you who could make out the words to that musical selection through all the static out there, you know that that's talking about lies. And basically, that's what we get, isn't it, Ralph? Lies?
That's correct, Bill. That's what I was taught in college, the accidental view of history.
And where does it take us?
It takes us into the truth, which is the conspiratorial of history. It's taken me 30 years to accumulate the evidence that that statement's true, that what we have been taught in schools and in our public arenas today is simply not true. What we call history is simply not true. It didn't happen the way we've been taught.
Now, what we're doing tonight really is just building up a basis for several other shows that you're going to be the guest here for several nights in a row. And what I want to do is make sure that everybody out there understands that we're not trying to blow smoke at them. Of course, my regular listeners already know that. But there are we pick up new listeners all the time. People that are just going through the shortwave bands, and they hear this, and they think it's interesting conversation, and pretty soon they're hooked. but they don't believe a word of it. Now, Ralph, how can you assure our listeners out there that you're not here to feed them some more lies?
Well, of course, we all are faced with that problem. Those of us that live in in the world today are faced with that problem. How do we know that Dan Rather's telling us the truth, or any other of the media?
That's not a very good example. It doesn't take much research to find out that Dan Rather's not telling us.
Well, see, but the American citizen doesn't believe that. I think the American citizen believes that what Dan Rather says is true. So my point is that we're all obligated to seek the truth. How do I know that I'm telling the truth? Because great people of the past, like Abraham Lincoln and Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, have told us that I'm right. Now we even got proof that Bill Clinton, our current president, confirmed that we're right when he gave that speech in July of 1992. So this is how we know we're on the right track. Those things that we're telling the American people are true. That the events that we've been taught in school did not happen the way that they claimed.
Well, I know that, and you know that. Of course, a lot of the listeners out there know that. In fact, the truth about the American people is that they believe if Dan Rather didn't say it on TV, that it's not true.
That's true, too. The converse is true. That's correct.
To the point where when they go to the grocery store and they're looking at products and trying to determine which product to buy, if they haven't seen it on a commercial on television, they're most likely never to buy that
product.
That's correct. For some reason, how did this come about?
Well, that's part of the process. We've been conditioned to accept that our leaders would not lie to us. They would tell us the truth, and that's part of the process. Even when we start to question, as we did in the 1992 election, about the liar George Bush, he still got many, many votes. He got, 40-some% of the vote. So even when they knew that he lied to us about read my lips, they still voted for him. Bill Clinton promised when he married Hillary not to indulge in extramarital affairs. He did. He was elected. Even when we know they lie, we still vote for him.
Wow. But Ralph, take us back now and sort of give us some groundwork that people out there, if they want to, give us something that they can take and go to the library and look up and check this out.
Well, that might be as good as
something on the ground floor, real basic, real beginning.
I think this example we've already cited, we've discussed already, Bill, about the speech by Bill Clinton is an excellent way to begin. We can now know for certain that Bill Clinton knows that there is a conspiracy because he said it with his own words. If you want to check that out, get his book entitled Putting People First. Go to the back of the book, page 217. You'll read his speech that he gave to the American people at the Democratic Convention in July of 1992. In that speech, he talks about Carroll Quigley. Go to any library. If they don't have the book, ask them to get it, called Tragedy and Hope, written by Carroll Quigley, and you will know what Bill Clinton knows. It's that simple. The evidence is there. All you've got to do is find it.
But that book is difficult to find. I know it's difficult to find. I also know that it's about, it's well over 1,000 pages.
Okay, to make it even easier for you, I'll recommend that you open it up to page 950. That's where Carroll Quigley tells you about this International Anglophile Network. Those of you that don't want to go to the trouble, that want to read it documented, you can get my little booklet called The Clinton Conspiracy. I actually photographed the page on which it said, so there's no question I've got the information. That little booklet you can get, we'll give you an address at the end. You can read that yourself, and you can know for certain that our current president, Bill Clinton, admits that there is a conspiracy and that he supports it. No question about it.
Well, what about farther back in history? Where can they start to begin to find these footprints and follow the thread? Let's go start today, because that's a conspiracy to the future. I mean, we got to go back and prove that we're where we're at because somebody way back when started this ball rolling.
Well, I think a good place to start is going back to the American Revolution. You can find the evidence of this conspiracy as simply as getting one of your dollar bills out. The back of the dollar bill, I'm sure you've talked about this. The Great Seal of the United States is shown there for the first time in, I think it was 1935, that appeared publicly. Both sides of it appeared together. You can get that out, and anyone that's listening right now can get a copy of the dollar bill and flip it over on the back, and then ask yourself if you know whether or not what those symbols mean. The eagle, the eye above the pyramid, the Latin phrases. Do you know what those things mean? When you go back into the past, you can find the evidence that our founding fathers knew what it meant. They were the ones that adopted them. And then you do a little research and you can find out why the eagle on the right-hand side has 32 feathers on the right wing and 33 feathers on the left. What the number 13, what the symbology of the number 13 is. What does that eye represent on the left side of the Great Seal? What's this pyramid all about? There are no stone pyramids in America. Yet on the back of our dollar bill, there's a stone pyramid. Why did they write these phrases in Latin when we spoke English at the time of the adoption of the Great Seal? All of these things are there for a reason. And the first question any American should ask is, why don't you know what those symbols mean in this land of the free and the home of the brave, of the government of the people, by the people, and for the people? How come you don't know what those symbols mean?
Well, actually, the reverse of the Great Seal of the United States has been available to the public since it was passed and accepted by Congress in 1789. Just that nobody ever goes and looks at it. The seal has never really been cut, and the first time that the general public ever really saw it was when it appeared on the dollar bill.
Well, I think that's true for the reverse side, meaning the side with the pyramid. I think the eagle side might very well have been more public. I think there was more discussion about it, but the reverse side, I believe that's correct. It never did appear in public until it was shown, I believe, on the back of the dollar bill in 1935, I think it was.
Now, isn't it true that when the Bavarian Illuminati was outlawed and they raided the lodge and found the papers, that this same seal was actually the seal of Adam Weishaupt's Bavarian Illuminati?
Well, if that's true, Bill, I've never seen that. If that's true, which it might very well be, I'd love to know that. I've not found that. Not that I've looked for. I've just never heard that. It's quite likely that's where it first originated.
It didn't come to my attention until somebody called me up and said, you know that the 1776 on the bottom course of the pyramid doesn't stand for the year that the Declaration of Independence was written, don't you? And I said, no, I thought that was exactly what it was for. And they said, well, if you look into the history of the Adam Weishaupt's Bavarian Illuminati, you'll find that this exact same seal was used by them. Now, whether it was the seal of the Bavarian Illuminati or not, I don't know. But I have found in my research that this did appear on the papers that the Bavarian government actually found when they raided the lodge and took the papers after it was outlawed. Now, we know that Thomas Jefferson was a staunch defender of Adam Weishaupt and the Bavarian Illuminati when they were condemned by the governments of Europe, when they found out that these people really had a plan to topple the kings from their thrones and take over the world. This was a plan that they'd actually written.
Well, let's go back. People are asking for documentation. Thomas Jefferson's a good source. We know that he wrote about the Illuminati and that he did it in favor. He supported it. That's all a matter of public record. It's a matter of finding it in his own writings. So you talk about documentation. It's not easy to find, but once you find it, it proves our point that there's something going on in this country, and that the evidence that it's going on is all around us.
And I'm going to tell you, folks, that an awful lot of it is in your own library, especially if you live in a big city or if you have a large university or college library near you, or even just a big city library like the Library of New York, or if you're near the Library of Congress. You can find not only the footprints but the proof absolutely that would convict this group, these people who are bringing this about, these secret cabals, some people call them. You know who they are if you've been listening to this program. Would convict them in any court of law if you could get a court of law to hear it. Now, why can't we get anybody in the legal system to look at this and understand it and acknowledge that this is happening?
Well, if I had the magic answer to that question, we'd save this nation.
But don't we have the magic answer to that question? Don't they take oaths to protect each other? And aren't these people sitting on the bench benches in our courts?
Well, this is one of the problems. Of course, we know that most of the federal judges. I can't say this for certainty, but I believe that most of the federal judges are appointed by the president, or at least by his advisors. And if that's true, then the very powers that put Bill Clinton and George Bush and Ronald Reagan in office are the ones selecting our judges, and they don't want this truth to come out. I admit that's true.
And we know because we have copies of the oaths. I've read the oaths over the air, that if one of their secret group comes into the court and gives the secret sign, then if the judge is indeed a member of that secret organization, he has to rule in favor of that person by the oaths that they take.
That's correct. And this is one of the problems. In fact, I've asked our county attorney who lives in Tucson, came to one of our clubs that I belong to speak to us, and I asked him that question, whether or not he knew about this. And I have to admit, he told us he did not. He did not know about this, and allegedly have never heard this before. I'm not quite convinced I believe that. But I want to go back to
by their own oath, they take an oath of secrecy. By the oath that he takes, he can never admit it.
Yes, that's correct. I want to go back to your comment about the Illuminati, Bill. I first found them in a book called Proofs of a Conspiracy, written by John Robeson. That book was, at one time, very hard to find. I believe there are only like 1 or 2 copies in the entire world. Someone made that book available. It's now available to anyone that wants to read it. It was written in 1789 by a member of the Masonic Lodge by the name of John Robeson. John Robeson discovered the Illuminati. He was asked to join the Illuminati. He wrote a book about after he discovered it. And what he was up to. He wrote a book about it, written in 1789, published it. That book was read by George Washington. George Washington's written letters about John Robeson's book, entitled Proofs of a Conspiracy. Anyone can read that book now because someone cared to make it public. It was public a few years ago, but prior to that date it was buried. It was very hard to find.
And this was a first-hand account of someone who actually, for a short period of time, was a part of this.
That's correct. John Robeson's his ability to research is without question. James Watt, the inventor of the steam engine at the time, wrote about Professor Robeson and his great academic ability, his research ability. He was a scholar without question in his day, and what he discovered can be relied upon. He was a fine professor who did a great job of researching this evidence.
In the 1898 edition of Albert Mackey's History of Freemasonry, James Watt is listed as one of the sovereign grand commanders of one of the branches of Freemasonry. I don't remember right off the top of my head which branch it was, but he's listed right in there.
Well, it's quite likely
he would know.
It's quite likely, once again, that it was intended for Robeson to write this book. Don't forget, Bill, that this conspiracy wants this stuff out. They want it available. If what you're saying about James Watt is true, it could well be that he was urged to recommend the book to get people to read it. But in any event, Robeson's scholarship by other sources is without question. It's almost impeccable. He did a fantastic job and service. But it's quite likely that they wanted this material out. One of the things that I've concluded, and I've not found this in writing yet, is that Adam Weishaupt in 89, when he was discovered, I believe he's the one that broke the truth. He wanted the Illuminati to be discovered and made illegal so the men would scatter. This is my theory, that he felt that the Illuminati had grown to the point now where it could be powerful. It was staying at home in his home base in Bavaria. I believe Weishaupt went to the Bavarian government and made it public, or at least released information, or at least told them where they could find the information, so the Illuminati would become public, so it would be forced out and become illegal, so the men would scatter. And when they did, they started groups of the Illuminati all over the world, including the United States.
Well, we know that is not really the way it happened, Ralph, simply because the way it was discovered by the Bavarian government was through an act of divine intervention, when a messenger was actually struck from his horse by a bolt of lightning, and they found the papers in his pouch.
I've also read that there were 5 men who broke from the Illuminati. I don't know which one of those 2 stories is true, but in one of the books I read, 5 men broke with the Illuminati and went to the heads of the Bavarian government. So I don't know which one is true. If your version is correct, then of course there was no way. It was not intended. But if my version is correct, that there were 5 men who broke from it and went to the Bavarian government, I believe Weishaupt was the one who sent them.
Well, there may have been 5 who broke and went to the Bavarian government after the information was discovered, probably to save their own necks, because they were condemned. And that's highly possible. But we do know from the actual history of Bavaria that this story of the messenger being hit by lightning off his horse and finding these documents in the pouch is true. That's easily verified. But and it is true that some of the members of the Bavarian Illuminati did talk to the officials when they were arrested, as anybody ever does when they're caught with their pants down. Somebody always talks. That should be a lesson to anybody.
Well, in any event, going back to your comment, in any event, the Illuminati did scatter after it was discovered, however, by the Bavarian government. And it's known that it came to the United States. It's known that it went to various governments of Europe. It instigated the French Revolution of 1789. Was it 1798, I guess it was? That's now been established. John Robeson proved that as well in his book. And others have done the research to prove that the Illuminati did become powerful enough to cause the French Revolution. So we know that the Illuminati did scatter and became a power in the various governments and causing revolutions and wars all over the period.
That's true. And we know that most of the revolutionary groups throughout history stem from not just the Bavarian Illuminati, but from this overall group of those who consider themselves to be illumined and possess the truly mature minds of the world, and consider the rest of us to be too stupid to have any process in determining world future events. How are we going to deal with that?
Well, obviously, the only way we can, Bill, and that's my whole purpose, and I'm sure it's yours as well, is to educate. We've got to get people to be aware. That's time-consuming. It's difficult. It's also sometimes it can be costly. You have to buy books and tapes and videos and study and read. But education is the only answer so far that I know of. We've got to educate the American people because we are the ones doing these things to ourselves. We are allowing it to happen. We're the ones who vote for these elected officials who are part of this conspiracy.
Well, you know, a lot of people think they vote for him, but in truth, the vote of the people doesn't have anything to do with who gets elected.
Well, I admit, Bill, that they put the two candidates out. They select both of them and make sure that we're told those are the only two options we have. But don't forget, the American people still vote for those two candidates. They don't have to do that. And the way to do that is once the government knows, these conspiracy knows about this power, I believe we can alter their choices, and we can ultimately end up with people who will save this nation.
I think we can save the nation. I think we can take it back. I think we can make it into whatever we want it to be or whatever it was intended in the first place. And I think the best way to go about this is with the intention of reinstating the Constitution and the Bill of Rights as the supreme law of the land. We know that that's been wrested from us. Is there any doubt in your mind that the Constitution has been thrown in the trash can, so to speak?
Well, one of the things that I discovered a few years ago was the evidence that our founding fathers were the ones that did that. I'm sure you've talked about this. I'm not the first one to mention it, I'm sure, on your program. But Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 proves that our founding fathers intentionally subverted the very document they wrote. Now, that's very difficult. A lot of people have difficulty in believing that, but the evidence is overwhelming. It's very easy to find. Anyone that wants to get a copy of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution can read this themselves. It's very easy, very provable.
Well, it's very hard to get a copy of the Constitution. I mean, a real copy of the Constitution. Anybody can get a copy out of the World Almanac or something like that, but to get a real copy of the Constitution with the real preamble to the Bill of Rights, and there is a preamble to the Bill of Rights that most Americans have never seen. There are copies of the Constitution that have the capital letters where they're supposed to be, but most of them don't. And of course, you know, in the legal sense, that changes the whole meaning. But you're right that they did sabotage us from the beginning, and they knew they were doing that, and they talked about it in their letters and in their writings to each other. It's hinted at in the Federalist Papers. Ben Franklin, when he came out of the convention hall after the Constitutional Convention, after the Constitution had been adopted and signed, he was asked, "What have you wrought, Ben?" And he replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." And he was implying just exactly what it says, that probably we would not be smart enough to keep our Creator endowed rights, that the Constitution was there to preserve for us and protect us from usurpation of those rights.
Well, yeah, I think you're right, Bill. There's quite a bit of evidence that Ben Franklin was part of this cabal that you're mentioning.
Absolutely. Wasn't he the master of the Nine Muses, the Lodge of Nine Muses in France? And he was actually the Grand Master of the first, one of the first Masonic lodges ever established in the United States.
But the point is that it was well taken that we could lose our government if we did not continue to educate ourselves and our as the Constitution calls it, our posterity, to show them exactly what a republic is and how we should keep it and why we should keep it.
That's right. Well, Ralph, you're going to be here again tomorrow night, so it's not going to be a great blow to tell you that we're out of time. And everybody out there, make sure that you're by your radio tomorrow night, because we're going to get into specifics tomorrow night and the night after and the night after that. We're going to get down to the nitty-gritty, and we're going to get into this thing. We're going to jump in with both feet. Tonight was just to sort of get you acquainted with Ralph Epperson and what we're going to be talking about. And, of course, what we're talking about is what I always talk about, but you get to hear it from a different point of view and a different person. And Ralph Epperson and I don't agree on everything, but you're going to hear his point of view the way he believes it to be. And like always, I caution you not to believe anybody. Don't believe me. Don't believe Ralph. Don't believe Bill Clinton. Especially don't believe Dan Rather or Flush Limbaugh or Tom Valentine or any of these other people out there unless you can research it in your own time and verify it. If you can't, if you believe anybody just because you think that they're truthful, you're always going to be a puppet on the end of somebody's string, and when they pull that string, you're going to dance. Good night, and God bless you all.